Hi there, I hope you're doing well. Just a quick reminder that I am Laura, the occupational therapist with the Caring for My COPD program, and this is our leisure and lifestyle education session. So, as you likely already know, my role as an occupational therapist is really around all of those daily activities that you want or need to do throughout the day, and leisure and doing things that are important to us can be a really big part of how we're feeling. So today, that's what we're going to touch on in this video. So you right now will find me sitting on my back deck because it's my most favorite spot at this time of the year. It's just, I find that that's really a relaxing place for me and a place of enjoyment. And so I thought that that was really fitting for me to film this video because this one is all about doing things that are meaningful and bring us joy throughout the day. So if we think about what it means to be living well with COPD, I often hear two different things. So the first thing that I hear is, having my symptoms under control and being able to manage my COPD symptoms. And the second thing that I often hear is being able to go about my day and do those things that I want or need to do throughout the day. And that's absolutely true. So when we think about how we're coping and how we're managing, being able to do those things we love is so, so important. Now, just a quick note, COVID, of course, has played a huge role on all of our day-to-day lives. Absolutely. It's disrupted our normal. It's taken us away from a lot of the things that maybe we enjoy doing or people we enjoy seeing. So that's another layer on top of our COPD when it comes to doing things that are meaningful to us. And so what I will just say with respect to COVID in this video is that we, even though things might be starting to reopen or wherever we're at in terms of COVID when you watch this video, we really still need to be careful, right? So we need to be following the most up-to-date public health recommendations, which will likely still mean practicing physical distancing, wearing a mask, washing our hands. So whatever activities that you want to do or be getting back to, please make sure that you're following those most up-to-date public health recommendations and that you're being safe. Because of the way that things change so quickly with COVID, I'm not going to go into huge depth with how that impacts on our day-to-day activities right in this video. But what we'll do instead is that when I call and talk with you and follow up on the video, we'll maybe talk about that together, about where things are at in terms of COVID, how that's impacting on your day-to-day activities, and if there's some strategies or things that I can recommend with where we are at that point in time. But for right now, recognizing that yes, COVID has absolutely disrupted our activities and the things that bring, and quite likely the activities that bring us joy. And so I really encourage you, let's talk about those. Let's talk about those things that are important to you, and maybe we can problem solve together how we could get you back to them, or a different version of them, or trying something new. Okay? But let's go back to COPD, because COPD can really, really impact on those things that bring us joy, right? I think oftentimes if people are struggling with shortness of breath or low energy or all of those types of things, those things that we enjoy doing, which can often be considered those extra things, right? Maybe like going out for coffee, going golfing, meeting a friend, going shopping, knitting, baking, right? All of those kind of things that might be considered extras throughout our day, but are so critically important for how we're feeling, might be the first things to go if we find that, getting dressed, having a shower, doing the cleaning just exhausts you. So that's why we really want to focus on that today, because those activities are so important for our physical and our mental health. And so we're going to go over some strategies for how we can keep carving those things that bring us purpose and meaning and really fill us up, right? Fill our cups. How we can keep building them into our days. Okay, so the first thing is that I know that you've all already had the energy conservation education session, and so this is kind of a little subset of that conversation, but really apply to those leisure activities. So before we get started, what I would encourage you to do is to really think about what activities bring you joy. What do you enjoy doing? Is it golfing? Is it going for a walk? Is it baking? Is it sewing? Is it gardening? Is it doing day trips? Is it going to see your grandchild play a sport? Or taking care of grandkids? Or is it playing a sport yourself? What is it that brings you joy? And what do you enjoy doing? And so I'd really encourage you to reflect firstly on that, and then secondly to consider, are you doing those things right now? Okay, and if you're not, why not? Okay, so what would those barriers be? Would it be shortness of breath? Would it be low activity or low energy? What are you kind of struggling with that are kind of acting as the barriers? And I think a lot of times, absolutely, it is that shortness of breath and low activity tolerance, as we call it, or energy, that get in the way. And so today we're focusing on, again, those 6 P's of energy conservation that we talked about earlier on in the program, because they too can absolutely apply to any of those leisure activities, any of those things that you enjoy doing. So just as a quick recap, we'll just touch on those 6 P's again. So the first P would be pacing, right? And so thinking about the speed with which you're going, right? Slowing it down, taking rest breaks before you really feel like you need them. That pacing piece, okay? The next P is planning. So really thinking about what you're gonna do, when you're gonna do it, what you need to do it, right? So, and maybe planning it during the time of the day that you feel the best. So maybe that's, okay, I really enjoy getting out and going for a walk. Okay, so what time of the day do you feel your best? Is it in the morning? Is it in the late afternoon? Is it in the evening? And planning that activity for when you're feeling your best. The other part of planning is planning the other factors that will make it either easier or harder to do it. So for example, if we're using the example of going for a walk outside, the heat and humidity through the summer can play a really big factor, right? And so planning it at a time of the day where maybe it's earlier in the morning or later in the evening, where that humidity in the sun isn't at its peak, can make a difference. Okay, planning what you need, so gathering up everything that you need before you get started. Okay, so that planning piece. The next P that we often talk about is prioritizing, and again, this is an interesting one when it comes to leisure and things we enjoy doing. As I already touched on earlier on in the video, right, those leisure activities can sometimes be one of the first things to go if shortness of breath is an issue, right? And so I really encourage you to think about how you could prioritize your week to prioritize these types of activities, things that fill you up. things that bring you joy. And yeah, and how can you build them in? And so maybe that's, okay, one morning a week, that's going to be my priority, or one day a week I'm going to put aside maybe the cleaning or the cooking so that I can do something for me and something that I enjoy doing for me. Okay. So that's prioritizing. Okay. The next one is positioning, right? So thinking about what positions you're in and how they would impact on your breathing. So I think a big one that we often talk about is in terms of that bending, the bending and the reaching, right? Anytime you need to bend over, you're going to kind of compress those muscles that we use for breathing. So can you think about the position that you're in? Or could you sit versus stand? Could you make some changes like that to save yourself some energy? And then the last P that we'll touch on is, again, that pursed lip breathing, which I know comes up in every single education session, but I think that just highlights how important it truly, truly is. Okay. And so that idea of breathing in through your nose and slowly out through your mouth, and thinking about, okay, how could I build that pursed lip breathing into going for a walk, or into my golf game, or when I go and see my kids or grandkids play a sporting event. How can I use that breathing throughout so that I don't struggle quite so much? So when at the beginning of the video, I asked you to think about which activities were important and meaningful to you, I now kind of encourage you to think about, okay, if I've been struggling with any of those, how could I use those different P's to make those activities a little bit easier? So we already touched on the walking piece, right? Maybe if it's golfing, which I often hear a lot, maybe it's use a golf cart. Maybe it's, again, you plan your golf game for early in the morning or kind of towards the end of the day. Maybe you just do 9 holes versus 18. Kind of how could we change up those activities to make them a little bit easier for you? When I call and talk to you, we'll go over some of those things, and we'll talk about what's important to you, what's meaningful to you. And then I'm happy to brainstorm through some of those different energy conservation principles and how they could apply to whatever activity you would like to get back to. Okay. What you might find too, that often comes up is, with my shortness of breath, that activity that I used to love doing just maybe isn't doable anymore. And so if that's the case for you, what I encourage you to think about is, what did you enjoy most about that activity? And why did you enjoy it? And then, are there other activities that maybe we could modify to get some of those components of it as well? Okay. The other piece of leisure is that sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating to go out and do something on your own. And so I do encourage you, and again, with COVID, just be careful to consider where we're at with COVID, who's in your bubble, and making sure that you're maintaining physical distancing throughout. But could you go and do something with a friend? Could you include them in? Sometimes having kind of that friend or accountability partner that you go and do something with can be a great way to build some leisure activities in. That segues very nicely into another important part of this conversation when we're talking about leisure and lifestyle, and that's in terms of our friendships and our relationships with others. And so recognizing that COPD can have a huge impact on our relationships, all forms of relationships, right? Whether it be with your spouse, kids, friends, family members, it can have an impact, right? And so oftentimes when we're talking about COPD, it can change those dynamics, and for lots of different reasons, right? But what we hear a lot is our clients saying, you know, those people around me often respond in kind of one of or two ways. Of course, there can be other ways as well. But sometimes our friends and family might respond in a way of being overprotective. And so they might say, no, 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 don't do that. No, I got that. Don't do that. Let me take care of you. Let me do it. Or they might respond in another way in terms of not really understanding what COPD is, not understanding the struggle of shortness of breath, or really seeing the difficulty. And so they might distance, or they might not understand why maybe you can't do something the way you used to. And so that can in and of itself really play into our leisure activities too. So what I would firstly encourage you with is that oftentimes both of those reactions, that being overprotective or also not really understanding the changes, often comes from a place of love and worry, right? So oftentimes family members, again, it can be scary to see you struggle with shortness of breath. And that can be a challenge, right? And so what I really encourage you to do is to start the conversation with your family members, with your loved ones, about your COPD, about what your normal is, about what can happen when you get short of breath, what strategies you use, what can be helpful, what's not helpful, and start giving them insight into what it's like to live with COPD. The lovely thing about having all of these videos, so this is a silver lining of COVID and us making videos, is that you can share these videos with your friends and family members, and they can maybe gain a little bit more insight into what you're going through and how that would impact on your day. And the beautiful thing is that maybe you two or your family could brainstorm together around, okay, how could we change things up so that we can do activities that matter and that are manageable for all of us. And sometimes when family members have a better understanding, then it's easier to pace, right? Because we all just walk at the same, we all slow down a little bit, or we all build rests in. And sometimes having that extra knowledge makes it a little bit easier, so that when you're out and about doing things and you find maybe you're a little bit short of breath, you don't have to explain those things quite as much. Okay, so really opening up that conversation with them. Not that it needs to be the whole conversation all at once, but in little bits. And you can even say, you know what I learned today, and starting that conversation. Okay. The other piece that I like to touch on just very briefly is around the role that COPD can play on intimacy. So recognizing that, as with all of our other daily activities, can be impacted by COPD, intimacy can also be. And so I just really encourage you to again start the conversation with your partner about your worries, about what your struggles are. And then to think about, okay, what are those 6 P's that we talked about earlier? And could I use some of them in our relationship together? And so that's something that I am absolutely happy to discuss with you when we follow up on the phone, In the handouts that I've sent out, there's also some specific suggestions in terms of how to integrate those 6 P's when it comes to intimacy. Things like thinking about timing of the day, using your rescue inhaler before, thinking about positioning, all of those types of things. And so if that is a concern for you, I do really encourage you to have a look at those resources that I've sent to you. Okay, and kind of teasing them out and seeing if any could be helpful. But I do really encourage you to start that conversation and have really open communication with those that you love. Okay. But just as a recap, this education session is really around getting you back to those things that are meaningful and important to you. And you might find, maybe there aren't a lot of activities that I enjoy doing, or maybe I just don't feel able to do them. And so I look forward to talking to you about that too, about where your interest lies, because maybe we can problem solve and get some things set up to build some leisure into your day. In the handouts that I sent along, I've also sent along a document that I created specifically around COVID and different activities that you can do that are a little bit safer in terms of COVID. So in terms of staying at home a little bit more than we typically would, activities that we could build more physical distancing into. And so I do encourage you to have just a quick glance at that document to see if there's anything that stands out to you that we could start building in some new activities. Okay. Well, that's all for today, but I will give you a call in the next little bit, and we'll go over the information that we talked about. So before I do that, and before I sign off, just a reminder of your homework, to think about what you enjoy, think about what's meaningful and what's important to you, and then I look forward to talking about it with you soon. Okay? Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.